Cool. All right, so this is the specific learning disabilities presentation by myself, Ben, Ian, Taryn, and Erica. All of us on our right side of the screen. It may invert once Zoom does it. So we're going to get right into this. Go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about the key aspects and characteristics of a specific learning disability. So a specific learning disability could be anything that particularly deals with one or multiple traits. And the reason I say multiple is some of those traits can overlap and go into various areas, such as in reading and writing, which is what we're going to start with first. So in reading, this can often be diagnosed as dyslexia because there's usually a difficulty decoding single words as well as sentence structure. And that breaks down even further into connecting letters and sounds together. So if you can't make a sound with a letter, you can't make a word. You can't make a word, you can't make a sentence. And so that usually leads into comprehension being a little more difficult to understand. And deeper levels of comprehension include understanding jokes or sarcasm, those things that maybe not literally said, such as, oh, well, we got a funny guy here. Well, the word funny may not be the most applicable to a person who doesn't exactly understand the word terminology, even though the speaker could be trying to be sarcastic. In the terms of written or writing language, these are sometimes known as dysgraphia. It's usually a poor performance among writing, usually breaking down with vocabulary and grammar, and then that punctuation. This often goes back a lot of times to the reading and the sentence structure, and it can often impact things like spelling and fine motor skills because those are negatively connected and impacted due to the way that the brain is wired. This can often lead to trouble organizing thoughts and ideas. So as you can kind of see from the way that it's progressionally set up, if you don't have the fundamental building blocks, you can't build into a larger structure such as reading comprehension or more advanced vocabulary. So next area that we're going to be talking about, the next slide, Ian.
Is Ian there?
Okay. Well.
I became the
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, still recording.
Yeah.
Let me pause.
Okay, so little internet hiccup there. So going on, we're going to be talking about mathematics. This can often lead to what's called dyscalculia or dyscalculia, depending on pronunciation. This, much like with vocabulary and with reading comprehension, where the sounds don't make sense in the concept of the words, number concepts are challenging. So things like cumulative properties, 3 plus 5 is the same as 5 plus 3, is a very difficult understanding for a lot of these students to be able to comprehend. So they have difficulty with multi-step problems because if they can't put literally 2 and 2 together, then they can't understand that 2 plus 2 plus another number leads to a more advanced problem. And it can have a big difficulty with word problems because of their vocabulary and or reading comprehension skills. So those basic pieces can build into socialization, which actually affects their reasoning. Trouble with nonverbal cues, both giving and receiving, and then trouble with social rules because they don't understand that if somebody's looking away from you, they're not interested. They may think, oh, they're distracted by something over there. They cannot literally put those two concepts together because they don't understand the fundamental bases of each concept individually. So while that is written kind of in mathematical terms where they can't put the concepts of 1 and 1 together, it's a socialization factor. This can often lead in many ways to attention and behavior. So they have trouble speaking and they have trouble listening because if they cannot engage in this action or they cannot engage in some way, shape, or form in a way to understand, then they lose attention. Their mind has to be focused elsewhere. So they're usually very hyperactive, which can usually be diagnosed or actual ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But it also leads to poor memory and short attention spans because they can't focus very long. They don't choose to take in information. And because they don't take in that information, it becomes a norm. Don't learn things because they can't take it in larger stints. So we're going to pass it over to Taryn, and Taryn's going to talk about the next step.
Hey everyone, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce the history of specific learning disabilities. The first one that was spoken about was dyslexia. This was actually introduced in 1877, so the earliest of the four that we're going to be going over. This actually started as a concept called word blindness by German physician Adolf Kussmaul. Dysgraphia is the second, which was coined in 1940s. It actually began as agraphia, and that was coined by Australian doctor Joseph Gressman. It turned into dysgraphia because two Greek words, dys meaning difficulty or poor, while graph is writing, so difficulty with writing. This third is dyscalculia, and let me just grab this. That was introduced by Salman Henshin, a Swedish neurologist, possible for a person to have impaired mathematical abilities that did not affect intelligence in general. The fourth was ADHD, actually mentioned in 1902, British pediatrician Sir George Still. He believed that some affected children could not control their behavior the way a typical child could, but they were still intelligent. So these are where those terms all began and kind of a little bit of brief history. Two landmark cases that I found that are primarily associated to these disabilities is the first passed in New York, a Senate bill that every school district and board of cooperative educational services is to be informed of the unique educational needs of students with dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. So people were recognizing it at an early stage that students with these disabilities needed additional educational needs. The second is Florence County School District IV versus Shannon Carter. Shannon Carter had dyslexia and ADHD. Her IEP guaranteed that Shannon would fall even further behind from her peer group. The case went all the way to the US Supreme Court, where it was decided that if public schools defaults and the children receive an appropriate education in a private placement, the parents are entitled to be reimbursed for the education that should have been provided by the school district. So Shannon Carter, unfortunately, fell victim to schools not having the proper educational needs, and they took it all the way to the US Supreme, where they needed to actually make changes so students would see changes happening in the classroom. Now we are going to take it over to Ian.
Okay. Looks like we switched. Who's sharing the screen? Okay, guys. I'm gonna go over some instructional strategies in regards to specific learning disability. We're gonna go over 5 different instructional strategies that can help you in the classroom. Majority of these are pretty straightforward. They are exactly how they sound, and most of you are gonna be familiar with them. So we'll go into the next one. Wait time, like I said, exactly how it sounds. Basically just giving your average student more response time when you ask them a question. Specifically around a 3 to 7 second pause after asking a question or giving out information is a good amount of time to let a student process that information. For example, imagine a student who's diagnosed with ADHD. Giving them this response time allows them more time to process information and answer a question. So that's wait time. The next, we all should be somewhat familiar with this, multi-sensory instruction. It's a way of teaching that engages more than one sense at a time. For example, if maybe you have students who are kinetic learners, meaning they like to get up and move around, and maybe visual learners at the same time, they learn visually, pictures, reading text, stuff like that. You're going to incorporate in your lesson or your activity something that hits both of those senses. For example, maybe a student with dyslexia, who has issues with visual learning, might draw a word in the air using their arm. Another example that I put that you can see on the screen, maybe a kinetic learner, maybe, again, we're using an example of a student who may have been diagnosed with ADHD. You could use movement in the lesson plan to help stabilize their focus. For example, maybe like a gallery walk or something like that. That's multi-sensory instruction. Next one. Okay, modeling, another very easy one. Modeling, I took a screenshot from a video that I watched on the use of modeling a couple days ago. Obviously, this is a younger younger class or younger grade, excuse me, the teacher is modeling the correct use of proper hand, right? Safe hands, however you want to call it. Basically, she's showing how to do something in the words that I do, the teacher does, right? And then you do it together with the class, we do, right? And then lastly, you have the students do it independently, which is you do. And I use the example of that class, but you can use it in any grade, any age, right? You could also use it at the high school chemistry level, or excuse me, a high school level chemistry class. You can model an experiment for the class, then do it with them, and then have them do it, right? And that's it for that. Next slide, please. Okay, graphic organizers. We all pretty much should know about this. Graphic organizers, they're basically visual tools that can show information or show connection between ideas, and can also help guide and direct students on perhaps taking notes on information being given to them, right? Graphic organizers can help kids condense their thoughts into short statements. This is really useful for kids who often struggle to find the most important idea when taking notes. This is something from my own experiences. Maybe if you're lecturing, especially at the high school level, you're perhaps lecturing your class and giving them a lot of information, and they might not have a lot of time to jot down notes of everything you're giving them. This is a good way of helping them identify what is really important to remember and take notes on. So, next one. Okay, one-on-one and small group instruction. Okay. This is a strategy that teachers can use to basically what you're doing is varying the size of the group you're teaching to. So maybe if you have a classroom with a roster of 30 kids, okay, depending on your resources, what you have available in the class, what you're teaching, you can break up the size of the class, okay? Some lessons might be better for Okay, guys, apologies there for little technical difficulties, but yeah, just wrapping up with one-on-one and small group instruction. Sometimes it's better to vary and lower the amount of students you're teaching to. Perhaps if you have a roster of 30 kids, it's better to break them up into smaller groups where you can provide better instruction and more in-depth instruction. And you could even take that to the next level where you can provide one-on-one instruction if you have the resources availability to do that. Perhaps you have a student that's really struggling in the class academically, or perhaps just with that certain subject or whatever lesson topic you're trying to go over that day. And this way you can really focus on that child and really provide better and more individualized instruction. And that's it with that.
Okay, so I'm going to be going over transition planning. So transition services in IDEA are basically the things that we can bring to a student in order to help them be successful in the outside world, outside of school. So this would be like helping them with vocational training and employment and independent living. So these also must be based on the individual's needs. So as a teacher, you're going to be kind of taking inventory on the things that they might need help with in the future. So from elementary school and on, we need to be kind of making sure that we have an inventory of what they might need in order to transition out of an IDEA learning plan in school. So basically, I have a couple resources for us here. Basically, they go over just a couple, actually not a couple, quite a few lesson plans, and some examples of that would be planning to teach students communication skills using community-based instruction. There are also lesson plans in order to teach students office job skills, to teach students computer skills that they might need in the future, and then also social skills. All of these things are extremely important as they transition out of regular and as they transition into post-secondary education. So a quote I found was that providing career awareness activities, work-based social skills training, travel skills training, and youth autonomy skills has demonstrated positive impact on employment outcomes. So we as teachers need to make sure that they are prepared for independent living in the future. And in order to do this, we can identify skills that need to be taught in the future, and then identify prompts to use, and then implement this instruction for the student. And then one of the most important things we can do is collect data on the student performance in order to make sure that they're prepared. And then another really important thing is called fade prompting when students master skills. So this is like ensuring that they have mastered a skill and make sure that we are not helping them with these skills so that they're able to be successful on their own. Yeah, so that is it for transition planning. Here's our little works cited, and that's all we have for students' specific learning disabilities. Thanks for listening.